part of the Another Realm Media Network. Welcome to this episode of Mysterial Experiences, where we delve into the heart of mystery and the ethereal. Today we invite you on a voyage through shadowed realms of the unexplained. From spectral whispers to cosmic enigmas. Join us as we explore tales and phenomena that challenge our understanding of reality, in a quest to uncover truths hidden in the fabric of the extraordinary. Prepare for a journey into the unknown, where each revelation is a step closer to unraveling the mysterial. Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Mysterial Experiences. We have a fantastic guest for you here today, Kathleen Marden, who, if you're anywhere in the UFO community, I'm sure that you know the name. But Kathleen is a big advocate for contact experience. We've actually had her on my other show, The Convergence Enigma, where we talked about her work with MUFON for experiencers and for contactees. And so we're going to get into a little bit of that additional detail here today. She's written a number of books. Some are about her own experiences, and some are about some more general details and content. And I think it's going to be a fantastic conversation. And so I'm happy that you decided to tune in. And welcome to the show, Kathleen.
Thank you. It's great to be back.
So, as I kind of mentioned in the beginning, you have done, again, for those that are just now tuning in or anybody who's a long-term listener, the purpose of this podcast is really to educate people on the experiences that people have. And I kind of like it's a little subline of the show, but we're trying to lift the taboo one conversation at a time. And so you have been a huge advocate for experiencers throughout the years, working with MUFON in the is it the STAR team, I think is what it's called.
It's called
ERT.
the Experiencer Resource Team. I was the founder of that team when MUFON asked me to found it back in 2011, and I am now the director emeritus after spending 10 years as the director.
And so the ERT, I believe, was renamed recently, if I remember correctly. It used to be called something else, not so much resource.
It was the Experiencer Research Team, and my focus was on research. But over time, the team's focus became more oriented toward assisting experiencers who were having difficulty coping with their experiences, and and also offering resources to those individuals. So I was still director when we decided to change that title. That
Yeah,
name.
and I think that although the name now implies, like you said, more of a support for experiencers, I also don't doubt that the town prior to the name being changed, that there was an equal focus not only on understanding the nature of the experience, but also in helping those who had had the experience. And so, um, yeah, I think,
Absolutely. We
yeah,
always set it up as a triage team
yeah.
from the beginning, but we did a research project on 516 experiencers. And, my background is in social research,
Mhm.
uh, academic background. So I really favored that, although, I'm an advocate for experiencers as well. And I don't want to see anyone suffer.
Right. And it is I think that's the nature of that aspect of the phenomena is that there are some, I think, that look back on it, on their experience, and have a positive regard. And then there are some that look back on their experience and still kind of hold a negative regard for the experience that they have or that they continue to have. And so, like you said, it's helping them process through this experience that they don't really seem to have much control over whether or not it happens and how it happens and what it means to them to be in this kind of out of control situation.
It is so difficult for people, and don't think that it's all the same for everyone. It depends upon the group of non-humans who take you on onto their craft or into their environment,
Mhm.
whatever it happens to be, and what occurs when you're in their environment, because that can vary widely. And
Mhm.
so some people have just horrifying
Mhm.
experiences and they're left deeply traumatized, whereas other people can come out feeling blessed that they have been given information, that they've been treated well. So it really runs the gamut. There is a
Mhm.
very wide spectrum of different types of contact with different entities.
Yeah, and that's, I think, the most important thing. What you just said there is the different type of entities piece is that it's not all necessarily all one group or all one species that are doing these types of experiences. It is across multiple different types represented. And yes, I have heard that with some people, some experiences are better than others. I think back to the stories of, the contact with the Venusians and that sort in the late 50s and 60s with, Woody Derenberger in West Virginia. And his experience with Ingrid Cold was much different than some of the quote unquote abduction experiences that happened into the 90s and the 2000s and even today.
Yes, in the early years, there were many people that were called contactees, such as George Adamski. There were
Mhm.
several others, and they were meeting with very human-looking non-humans in craft, and
Mhm.
these were highly advanced individuals who were here to assist humanity in our development and had solved their own problems. And then you had people who were burned or injured, or,
Mhm.
the craft accidentally landed on part of them, or, it's
Right.
dropped them and they were injured. So there were a number of things that
Mhm.
happened. And then, after the 50s and into the early 60s, we started with um, people being taken to craft and undergoing physiological examinations, scientific tests
Mhm.
on their bodies, ova sperm being extracted. When they took my aunt and uncle Betty and Barney Hill in 1961, they were all set up. I don't know how many people they took before they took the hills,
Mhm.
but they were set up and ready to do this. And it was the Greys who were the major uh, team doing this kind of work,
Mhm.
these probably longitudinal genetic studies, because then for many people, about 75% of the people, it became sort of an intergenerational
Mhm.
contact experience where people in the same families were taken periodically throughout their lifetime.
And so, that when you think about, like you said, they were set up ready to perform the experiment or the test, let's say,
Hmm.
um, which would imply some level of knowledge about our physiology prior to that occurrence.
Absolutely.
And I would think that even if it was their third time, let's say, when they took your aunt and uncle, that still, I think, wouldn't have been enough time to have the level of physiological knowledge needed in order to conduct the test that they conducted. So it really implies that there's been a long history of this type of phenomena occurring, where at least they're able to establish a baseline, let's say, of what human anatomy is like and our physiological features, etc., so that there's not much that surprised them, other than obviously in the case of your uncle with his false teeth, I think was the situation
Yes.
there. But I mean, stands to reason though that they've been preparing for this type of contact for a long time.
They absolutely had, and I have investigated cases dating back into the 1940s and 50s. So it wasn't made public early on. People certainly feared reporting it. If they did report it, then NICAP was the organization who was doing the investigating in the 50s. And they simply didn't even investigate. They just wrote it off as a hallucination or something. They didn't believe that anyone was being taken.
Well, and that also highlights another, I think, key issue with people that investigate in the field is that their unwillingness to consider other aspects of phenomena when they're doing their research, right? People who get kind of honed in or even narrow in on one specific thing that they're going to test for their hypothesis, and they push everything else that is on the fringe off to the side and call it noise or dismiss it altogether, when in all actuality, those fringe elements may be the missing piece to helping them understand more about their hypothesis.
Absolutely. And Dr. Alan Hynek was one who uh, was very much aware of this fringe element that he called high strangeness
Mhm.
phenomena. And, I started out in 1991 as a field investigator for the Mutual UFO Network. And I was very much a nuts and bolts investigator in those days, in that time frame. I was looking for physical evidence. You had to have a case disposition after you'd investigated the case, and the dispositions were very narrow. There was no disposition of abducted or having been on craft, or I don't even know if there was anything about sighting non-human entities in that
Mhm.
time frame either. It was totally almost based in physical evidence and looking for an alternative hypothesis about what occurred. And, I did that for a number of years. I was the field investigator, state section director in the state of New Hampshire at that time. And then I became the national director of field investigator training for MUFON. But over time, as I was doing these investigations, I've always been a person who was sensitive. I studied to be a social worker. I
Mhm.
graduated with my bachelor's degree in social service. And then I studied education in graduate school and was a teacher as well. Those are caring professions.
Right.
And so it really bothered me to have to determine whether a person was abducted or not, whether they had enough evidence to conclude that. And I was not ready to say that, no, it did not happen. And I started to hear stories from so many experiencers who had reported their experience. They were treated poorly by the investigator. Some were told that they had a psychological problem and they needed to go see a psychologist. Just, I mean, horrible,
Yeah.
horrible treatment. And I had to do something about that because I believe that everyone deserves respect.
Mhm.
Everyone. And so, and people who go through this experience don't hoax. They're not looking for attention
Right.
generally. I mean, you might say a tiny percentage look for attention, but they're looking for the wrong kind of attention because if you report you've had these experiences, the chances are you're going to lose your friends, you might
Right.
lose your job, you're going to have to pay somebody to help you to overcome your trauma
Mhm.
that you've experienced. Nothing good comes of this
Right.
as far as I'm concerned, unless you've reached a level of contact where the ETs are actually communicating with you and giving you information and healing you, and but that takes time.
Right.
But so I became an advocate for experiencers, and I just started saying, I cannot give you a case disposition. I will no longer uh, investigate where I have to give a case
Mhm.
disposition. because this is unfair and I have too much respect and compassion for people. And so I started doing my own investigations and treating people compassionately. And I did that for quite a number of years before MUFON asked me to start the experiencer. At that time, it wasn't even an experiencer, it was the abduction um, specialization team or something like that. And then it became the abduction research team. And then, we had to be politically correct after a while. People were crying out, "How dare you say the word
Right.
abduction?" So we changed it to experiencer research team. And then, of course, I spoke a little bit earlier about changing it to the experiencer resource team, where people from the ERT can talk with experiencers, can have a list of online support groups
Hmm.
that people can join, a list of for pay psychotherapists, hypnotherapists, that kind of thing. Also, Zero, um, Yvonne Smith's group, is an excellent, excellent group. It does the same thing. It helps people confidentially. And also Opus, OPUS, Les Velez's group has a team that helps experiencers through conversation. It's completely confidential. They don't even keep a record of who you are. So you can feel completely safe there.
What is the spelling on the Zero group?
CERO.
Okay, thank you. It's interesting because I'm currently in a master's program working towards my degree in psychology, and so I'm learning a lot of the different psychological founders, let's say, that we kind of pull from today. And recently, I just went through a class. And they talked about Carl Rogers and his client-centered, focused approach in therapy. And he first developed that in the late 40s, early 50s. And so that is the norm now that we expect in therapy. It really makes me think that, if MUFON was established first and foremost as a scientific community, then they wouldn't have considered the client-centered focus of approach, you know, until much later, until it was regularly adopted. And so I think that, by you introducing them to that methodology, whether you knew that you were doing it, in that regard or not, I think that it probably helped put them ahead of the curve a little bit for what would probably eventually have been the expectation anyway.
Yes, I think so. And, in 2011, when I established this group at the request of MUFON's director and board of directors, there were only three of us. And to date, we have a team of 70 people. And over the years, I was able to attract PhD social scientists and healthcare personnel, medical doctors. I mean, they're not offering their services for free to
Right.
anyone or anything like that. They're consultants
Mhm.
to the team. And so they make the team much stronger, much more knowledgeable through their ability to consult with team members when they have questions.
Yeah, and I will say that as someone who is beginning my journey of becoming a field investigator, one of the concerns that I have is, and when it comes time to give a disposition on a case in which I'm not 100% sure that I can qualify it as not unknown. The handbook says you have to be 90% certain that it is unknown. And so I'm worried that it'll be difficult for me to make such a disposition, given what I know and who I talk to. So that's a hurdle I myself am going to have to overcome, even in today's available dispositions being probably a lot broader than they were for you.
Oh, yes, yes. In fact, in the beginning, not that many abductions were even investigated or given a lot of consideration. I'm just amazed. You know, MUFON didn't investigate Betty and Barney; it was NICAP, but they did not collect physical evidence immediately, although it was there. They didn't take the watches. They didn't even look at the spots on the trunk of the car. All of those things that I've investigated.
Right.
When I began my own investigation, after I was trained by MUFON to become an investigator, of course, early on, I saw other people investigating. I saw people like uh, Dr. Oh gosh, I'm having a little brain cramp here.
That's okay. Oh, were you going to say Stanton Friedman? I don't know.
No, I wasn't going to say Stanton. I was talking about the people early on who I
Oh,
I knew. Stanton was lecturing in I think that time frame or a little after that on UFOs are real. So I'm thinking about people who are specializing. Dr. James Harder, for
oh,
example, who was the lead investigator for the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization with Coral and Jim Lorenzen. He was
oh,
also a hypnotist. He was the one who investigated the Travis Walton case, the one who investigated the Charlie Hickson and Calvin Parker case, three women in Kentucky. A lot of those big
yeah.
early cases were investigated by Dr. Harder. And he had a very solid scientific reputation.
Mhm. Do you think that there is, so myself, I've been looking recently at things that we regard as magic or supernatural in practice and how they may have scientific um, counterparts. You know, I've often said and believed that magic is simply science we haven't understood and labeled yet. And so, might there be some mystical things that occur that do have a scientific understanding? We're just not quite there yet. Do you think that there's room in investigations today to consider the magical or mystical side of things as a part of a scientific approach?
Well, it depends upon what you're talking about. If you're talking about interdimensional phenomena such as light orbs, people flying through the air, unassisted, people being dematerialized and taking
Mhm.
up a beam of light, if you're talking about those sorts of things, um, Dr. Claude Swanson, he's now deceased, but he was a leading uh, physicist who uh, sort of specialized in this. He wrote a series
Mhm.
of books about this, just giving a scientific explanation for each of these things. It's a heavy book, but he's just incredible. He's showing the evidence
Mhm.
and he is explaining it using physics.
Yeah, I'll definitely have to look into the name in the book. It's very interesting. You know, the where I'm looking at right now is there's a magical practice often associated with magic called I'm totally going to blank on it now. It's sympathetic magic, and that is you're taking. You often have probably seen it represented in voodoo, where you would have a voodoo doll that represents someone else, and the actions performed on the doll are supposed to have an impact on whoever the doll is meant to represent. But sympathetic magic has been used for thousands of years. There are cave drawings that look like they could be sympathetic magic in the form of a medicine man drew a hunting party, let's say, going out to kill buffalo for the tribe. That would have been a form of a sympathetic magical ritual in hopes that it would actually come to pass, that they would have a good kill and they would get a lot of food and things for the tribe. And so when I take that and I compare it to quantum entanglement, where you have two different particles that exist in two different spaces, but the effects of one impact the other, it makes me wonder if there is any type of correlation that can be made between sympathetic magic and quantum entanglement. And so that's just the areas of like taking something that we would regard as very fringe in the world of magic and wondering if there is some sort of a scientific counterpart that may explain in part or in whole why it sometimes works.
Well, we know that human thought can have an impact on matter. Uh, it can have an impact on the outcome of things. There were thousands of children in Southeast Asia, I believe it was, or maybe it was India, who all meditated together to in an attempt to stop a war, and they were successful. There are other cases where, maybe you have cancer cells growing and you can expose those cancer cells to hatred and they'll continue to grow. Or you can expose them to love and they die. So it's that sort of thing. The human thought
Right.
does have an impact on matter. It's been demonstrated in laboratory experiments.
Mm. That reminds me of a book I read by about Jose Silva and some of his techniques in self-healing and things like that about using the mind to really concentrate on healing yourself or assisting others in healing. It's very very good comparison there between what mind over matter is, and potentially how to or the capability of expanding the idea of mind over matter beyond oneself.
But it's extraordinarily important to do it with positive energy,
Mhm.
with love, rather
Right.
than with dark energy.
So, talking real quick about the case. So, I read your book. Well, one of your books, Forbidden Knowledge,
Mhm.
and the scientific approaches that you kind of lay out in that book around the way that you worked with experiencers. I think that this is an area that I think you have, if I could say, have great passion around is the scientific approach to proving some of these things have factual basis. And is that just is that maybe your own way of working through things, or do you also have an ulterior motive in that if you can provide scientific evidence, maybe the rest of the scientific community would take some of this stuff seriously?
I never think about the rest of the scientific community. My background is in social science. That's what I,
Right.
graduated from college in, and so I've always been scientifically oriented in anything that I do. And since I was a teacher, I guess when I conduct experiments or I find evidence, I simply share it with the public and the interested public. I'm not trying to beat anyone over the head and say
Right.
this is real. It's just my way of helping everyone to move forward with the knowledge that they have. And
Mhm.
there are many of us now who are doing that, but there weren't when I began.
And so, when you kind of think about the origin of where you came from, and where you are now, and think about where you're going in the future, are there experiments or cases that you're working on now, or would like to work on to try to tease out some truths, so to speak?
Well, let me say, I have been ill for 15 months.
Mm,
First from the COVID vaccine. It was the fourth vaccine,
mm,
and I developed the symptoms of post-COVID syndrome. And then I tried to work, um, and I ended up with COVID.
mm.
And that put me in the hospital. I was under nursing care and physical
Wow.
therapy for several months. I couldn't do any work, and I have just finally recovered. But I still have to conserve my energy.
Mhm.
So, as what I'm working on right now is not any investigations. Um, I'm working on um, a survey And that survey closed today. I'm working
Mm,
on it with Dr. Melanie Barton Bragg, who is an ordained minister and a psychotherapist. And I think that I'm going to be working on it with someone who is a statistician as well. At least
mm,
he volunteered to do that with us. And so I'm certainly hoping that when we have all of this data to analyze, we're going to have a statistician who's working with us, and we are uh, going to obtain a tremendous amount of information, not only from the general public, but from experiencers of contact. And the name of this was the Marden Barton um, survey on religious belief and extraterrestrial life.
mm.
So that gives you an idea
Yeah.
of, do you have a religious belief? What is it?
Hmm.
Do you practice it? Do you believe that life exists on other planets? Do you believe that we are being visited from uh, by extraterrestrial life? And it goes on from there. We had 50 questions in all, and would in the end, if you've communicated with these non-humans, what have they told you? What have you
Right.
learned from them? So a tremendous amount of information that we're going to be analyzing. That's going to take a long time, is slow and methodical. And then when that is all put together, we're going to write at least two books, one for the academic community, and then one, the type of book that I write for
Yeah.
the interested public.
It's so it's fascinating because I don't know, maybe 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago, I had the thought of whether or not interaction with the phenomena, and I enclose the phenomena to be everything, not just UFO and extraterrestrial, but everything ghosts or psychic abilities or remote viewing, all of that kind of stuff. I think dreams, lucid dreaming, etc. I think all of that kind of stuff kind of fits within the envelope of the phenomenon. So I wondered if there was a requirement of some level of spirituality in order to interact with the phenomenon. If there was like a switch, let's say, in the mind that you had to flip in order to really be able to interact with some aspect of the phenomenon.
Well,
And
I think, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, I was just going to say I had an atheist on the show, and it was a very interesting conversation. And after the fact, I sent him a picture that I have of a spirit this was like a color photo of a spirit that I captured on an investigation once, and he didn't see anything in the photo. But
So
when I
he was
showed
a
it to
closed-minded
right,
scientist.
and so I do think that there's some expectation from the phenomena that you have to be open to things beyond the reason, beyond the realm of explanation, let's say, at least at this level of our understanding, in order to really understand or in order to interact with the phenomena.
And I think that you're correct. MUFON, when I was director of the ERT, did a study on 516 experiencers. Dr. Dancy Donderi, a psychologist, now retired from McGill University, worked on the study with us. Dr. Michael Austin Melton, and then members of our team. Some had master's degrees, some had bachelor's degrees, etc. But we discovered some of the traits that experiencers share in common.
Hmm.
And that is, they say that over time, they became more spiritual. That was one. They became psychic or intuitive.
Hmm.
Some of them developed the ability to channel healing to others.
Hmm.
Many had been healed when they had been ill from various disorders or diseases, healed by these extraterrestrials when they were taken to craft. So, this is very different from in the beginning when you're taken to craft and you're uh, paralyzed and terrified, and they're taking samples from your body, to over time developing a relationship with these non-humans where something changes
Mhm.
in you. You become a different person. You think differently about the world. You think about the entire world, and you're
Mhm.
concerned about everyone. You become concerned about the environment. And, there is so much. I wrote about this in my book, Extraterrestrial Contact: What to Do When You've Been Abducted.
But yeah, you're right. I So my own story shortly, begins in August of 2019 when I had a dream that really felt like a memory of holding a hand of an entity underneath the craft, and they told me that I was a hybrid, and I struggled a long time for years without really knowing what to make or what to do with that. But that kicking off my journey over the last almost 5 years, I am very much in a similar position. My intuition, I think, has always been there. Looking back on other aspects of my life, I think it's always been there, but I'm now listening to it more than I did before. I've started channeling other entities and really experimenting with that. Um, you're right. I do have a very strong um, sense of wanting to help everybody holistically, all of life on the earth. I struggle. I bet every 3 or 4 weeks, I try to take on vegetarianism, but it never takes because I have a household of meat eaters. But it really I constantly cycle back around to the intelligence of killing other and intelligent species. So I can firsthand acknowledge that all of those changes in me have happened really since that August 2019 date. And things continue to happen. I'm constantly thinking about ideas to help humanity in some way, shape, or form, experimenting with new ways of doing things that we've been doing all along, and just it's constantly there's just constant ideas that are just all the time flowing in my head of all these different things that could be done to improve not just the conditions of life, but the actual conditions of living. And
Mhm.
so, yeah, I when I heard that that was commonplace for people who are experiencers, um, you know, it again, it really made me feel like I wasn't alone in this experience that I'm having. And it gave me some reassurance that it was okay to explore these things as they come up.
And Dr. John Mack, who was the chief of psychiatry at Harvard Medical School, uh, is the person who spoke about the transformational process that experiencers go through over time as a result of their contact experiences. So, you've undergone that transformational process, and that sounds, it's just a really terrific thing. It makes people better human beings, in a sense. I think the ETs are very concerned about barbaric behavior
Mhm.
on this planet. They've told me that our level of spirituality is out of sync with
Mhm.
our technological progress, and that it is a threat. It poses an existential threat to humanity,
Mhm.
and they want us to just not being really upfront about it, sort of working in the background as quietly as possible. But they want us to grow up. They want us to become part of that planetary system of Some people call it the Intergalactic Federation, whatever you want to call it, but uh, that we would finally uh, be able to move beyond Earth, be able to have access to technology that will make this world a better place for
Mhm.
everyone. And I feel that now we're in a real struggle between darkness and light. And I'm just hoping that the light wins out.
Mhm. Yeah, I was just on Spaced Out Radio a couple of nights ago with Dave Scott, and I was talking to him about this topic. And I think he asked me like, how come they don't just come down and reveal themselves? And I think it's because when our historical past is that we do not do change well at all. And I think the sudden realization would there's an equal chance of us falling backwards as much as there is of us jumping forward. And so that's why I think it's a grassroots movement, right? It's
Yes.
one person at a time. And if you change one person at a time, eventually that tide will carry forward and it'll push the rest of humanity forward along with it.
Hmm.
And so I do feel like for the first time, I mean I'm not that old, and so and certainly my experience that I've had is not that old, but I do feel like for the first time in hundreds of years, we are making progress towards that spiritual evolution that we need to take. You know, that next evolutionary step is not to grow a third arm that'll help us watch TV extra, two channels at once or whatever, but to really take that spiritual evolutionary step of realizing where we are as a species, where we can go as a species, and what steps we need to take to get there.
I agree with you completely. I agree. We must use our intelligence. We must find a way to resolve the problems that have been plaguing this planet from the beginning of time, where it has been tribal warfare, kill or be killed. We, I think that we've evolved as humans beyond the point of being that barbaric. At least most of us have. And I think that's why we are seeing so much trauma among soldiers today. People who are coming back and committing suicide
Mhm.
because they can't live with themselves.
Yeah.
We're not in that place anymore. And we have to find new ways to resolve these old problems.
Well, and I think, and this is probably getting off the topic of experiencers a little bit, but I think as long as there is the haves and the have-nots, we will continue to see conflict between those in the middle that seek to exploit one side or the other. And I don't know the answer to that equation, but I do know that there are a lot of people in our world that have more than they will ever need, and there are people in our world who have little, if nothing at all. And there
True.
has to be a closer spot in the middle than the extremes that we regard each other with, like we have today.
But I want to bring up the point that regardless of how poor you are or how wealthy you are, it has nothing to do with how happy you are.
Right.
You can, I mean, if you have food, that's primary. You have to have food, you have
Right.
to have medical care. Education is good as well, but it is the compassion with which we treat one another.
Mhm.
Those who are in it entirely for themselves, they never look within. They look with greed at what they can take from others and how they can exploit and control others. Those are the troublesome people.
Mhm.
We have to find a way without killing them,
Mhm.
to convince them
Mhm.
uh, to be better people, because they're not good people when they behave in such a selfish and barbaric manner.
Well, and I think that there's probably a little bit of a the people that behave that way, they are outwardly expressing their inward emptiness. And so it's, instead of condemning them or, or whatever the case may be, maybe we also need to take time to understand the path that they've walked and has what has led them to their situation. I think sometimes we collectively are too eager to jump in and judge without knowing the full story of what has led the person to where they are right now, on either end of the spectrum or in the middle, regardless. And so to kind of
Yeah.
bring this back around to that experiencer, type situation, when you meet someone who is open and willing to discuss their experience, don't assume that they're a quack, that they're a nut.
True.
Be willing to listen to what that experience has meant to them, how it's affected them, in what way did it change their life? Were they able to get past it with their spouse if they were married? Were they able to get past it with their family, etc.? There's so much complexity to our everyday lives that we sometimes forget about. Just like the act of breathing, right? We know our body takes care of it for us, and so we forget that it's there and it's always happening, and there's functions within our body that helps us do it. Just like there are functions within our lives that we kind of fall into a track, if you will, of just doing these things every day. And I go to sleep and I wake up and I do the next thing, and we forget to realize that everyone has a unique path that they're on, a unique path that brought them to where they are. And if we just have a little bit of compassion and listen to those things about people and really care what they have to say, maybe we'll learn more about each other than we have ever learned before.
Yes. And I agree that it's important not to judge people, because each one of those individuals has a story that makes them what they are. And remember, we live in a society that for a very long time has pushed the idea of getting all you can own,
Mhm.
that was a sign of the kind of person you were,
Right.
not the real kind of person you were, what you did for others, your kindness, your compassion, but what you owned. But think
Right.
about where we're going to go to when we leave these bodies. We can't take any of that with us. So we should, in my opinion, become the kind of people who will be proud to be at that next level after our consciousness leaves our human body and we no longer have
Mhm.
those material possessions. We're no longer material.
The way I think about it too is that, the one's legacy has always been, I think, at the forefront of, as you start to age on in life and you kind of near the end of your rope, let's so to say, you start to think about, what is the legacy that I'm leaving behind? And is it a legacy of greed and possessions, or is it a legacy of helping those that needed help, or even just being there for someone who needed to talk? And so I think that if we really take a step back and think about what it is we want to leave behind, not like you said, very much true, we can't take it with us, but what do we want to leave behind is the thing that will help the next generation. On a very just very basic scale, from just a biological entity, it's ingrained in us to pass on what we've learned so that the next generation can potentially use it to better and prolong the species. And so I think, in that regard, it's making sure that we pass on the things that benefit the species, not the other way around.
Absolutely. And you have to hope that the next generation will benefit, will take that information and not have the belief that they know more than the previous generation and they're going to reinvent the wheel. And sometimes we have that happening as well.
Definitely. I mean, I'm sure that even in the UFO community, um, there are things that have been learned from 70 plus years of investigation that maybe some people who are just now opening their eyes to ufology and all that it contains are not aware of. To my knowledge, there's not a centralized place that I can go and find every book that's ever been penned about the topic of ufology. Maybe that's something that the next generation needs to pick up and create. So,
Yes, I'm not aware of that either, so maybe it doesn't exist.
but Kathleen, we're about at time. I want to give people an opportunity. Where can they go to find your books or even just things that you have going on?
Well, you can go to my website for a lot of information about me, articles, my aunt and uncle, my life, that sort of thing. Kathleen-Marden, Marden.com. All of my books are available at Amazon, most of them at Amazon, Barnes and Noble. Amazon has all of them, in all formats generally.
And I know for those that are listening, if you've had a contact experience and you would like help, MUFON still has the ERT. And you can go to MUFON.com and submit a report. And there's a section there to choose if you've had a contact experience, and you can fill out some additional information. And I would encourage you to do so, because sitting and kind of just coping and dealing with the experience that you've had on your own is just like any trauma. And if you leave it untreated, it will eventually cause physical damage. And so I encourage you to submit that case.
Mhm. Very good advice.
So, well, thank you, Kathleen, for being on. I've thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. The hour
I
has gone
have
by
to.
super fast. And thank you, everyone else who has watched and listened. Please share this episode with anybody who you feel could benefit from it. And if you've had your own experience and you would like to come on the show and talk about it, I'd love to have you. You can email me at Josh Rutledge, that's RUTLEDGE, at mysterialexperiences.com. So thank you, everyone, so much for tuning in and watching and listening, and we'll talk at you next time.
Bye bye.